Another wild conversation. Thanks for joining me, and I can't tell you how stoked we are to be here now at the edge of Yellowstone Park, and it's spring. Spring is finally settled in. It's like the one time of year we wait and wait and wait for after 6 months of solid winter. We can see green. I know this is not like what you see on the Pacific Northwest or the Eastern Seaboard, but my gosh, to have some green in our picture is really, really welcomed. The waterways are opening up, and you can see that there's still some snow up there in the background on the mountains, and there will be for some time here, but you can also see the standing water behind me. We've even been hearing amphibians, the boreal chorus frogs, making that. Not right now because it's actually kind of chilly right here, and there's snow in the forecast, which is typical for spring in Yellowstone. And with COVID still in the picture, the park is still closed. We aren't sure when it's going to open, maybe in the next few weeks, but no date has been given. So in lieu of you, I, and any of us being able to go into the park, which we're looking at here in the background, I'd give you these updates, and what should be happening is happening here in the park, even in our stead. So everybody's back. That's one of the cool things, is all the migrants that we typically enjoy seeing return like old friends. Everything from the wildflowers, the shooting stars, the biscuit root that are blooming along our hiking path in the morning, to the lazuli buntings that have just shown up. The ospreys are back. Eagles have migrated back. Peregrine falcons, they're here, and they're not setting up territory and arriving like we've talked about in previous broadcasts. They're here, and spring is in full swing. One of the big hallmarks of this time of year is the water starts flowing. Even the creek next to our house is flowing high and heavy. I slept out on the porch for the first time this year, and it was just my constant companion all night long to hear that creek really flowing. But they're all up, they're brown, they're frothy, and it's not limited to just the little watersheds either. A friend who is a big fisherman and keeps tabs on the Yellowstone River was telling me that the CFS, the cubic feet of water per second, went from about 3,000 in the Yellowstone River up to about 8,000 almost overnight, which is a huge jump, and that happens if we get a real warm snap. But I think what we're having now will kind of slow things a little bit. But it's like the life breathing through the arteries of this place as the water starts to flow and the green starts to come back, and there's babies showing up. We had our first buffalo calf seen on April 22nd, but we've seen more of them showing up here along the northern edge of the park in recent times. It's really exciting. I can't tell you in words how cool it is to finally have spring here. Within about 2 weeks, we're going to start seeing elk calves too. And so there's all sorts of things that are going on around that, namely some safety stuff, like us trying to stay out of the way of some of those cow elk who are, even before the calves are born, getting pretty antsy and seeming a little bit dangerous. They get defensive, and one of the things they've figured out here is, in recent history, certainly after wolves have come back and bears have increased in number, is that they have their kids around us. A lot of these elk calves will come right into Gardner, or cows rather, come right into Gardner. They'll set up shop right near the cabins and the hotels in the park, and they're going to be giving birth around those places like they do in natural settings, like on an island in the river or someplace close to an obstacle or a setting in which predators may not visit as much. And so there definitely are times here pretty soon where you'll get to see orange cones around a particular entrance, maybe even to the park headquarters building, keeping people away from a certain door, because we've had calves literally stashed on the doorstep of some of these buildings, the visitor center and things like that. So they're coming, but even now we're having to kind of be a little more wary. Interestingly enough, I've never been chased by anything. I had a close run-in with a grizzly on an occasion or two, but not like Jenny. Jenny's been chased by several things, and for the amount of time I've spent in the park and the number of miles I've traveled, she definitely has me beat in that department. And one day she came back a couple springs ago. Well, I'll back up. This weird minivan pulled into the driveway, and I was doing dishes or something. I look out the window, and out of that vehicle gets Jenny, red-faced and hyperventilating. And she came into the door, and after settling down, told me what happened. And she'd gone on our usual hiking route around the house and encountered a cow elk. Well, apparently this cow had either just given birth, had a calf stashed somewhere, was about to give, she was not happy with having Jenny and the dog there, and started to chase her. Well, Jenny ran in the opposite direction toward the road, thinking, well, I'll just signal to her I'm trying to get out of here and no harm is meant. Well, the cow kept coming, and the elk just chased after her, and she jumped the creek, and the elk kept coming. She went through the fence, and the cow elk cleared the fence and kept chasing her. She ran to the road, and into the road came the cow elk. And so she just started booking it, running as fast as she possibly could down the road toward home. And this cow elk is running parallel to her on the other side of the road with her chin up and her eyes kind of googly with that weird look like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but it may not be nice. So about that time, this minivan of tourists came around the corner, and they opened the door to talk to her, and she pretty much leapt across the laps of the people in the back seat as the cow elk came running right by. And that sort of fills in the rest of the story. So we got to watch it. We got to be careful. In addition to bears, we pulled the bear spray back out now, and there's a lot more bear tracks, grizzlies, and black bear tracks on the trails that we walk here around home. So watch for that. If you end up visiting here, the bears are back out in full force. There still is a little bit of winter kill showing up, so there are attractions out there in the landscape that you could stumble upon that have you right in close encounters with a bear too. The wolves should be coming out of the den with their puppies here pretty soon. Obviously, because we don't have a front row seat on a good den site here outside the park or along the border, that's another one we're going to have to wait for, but that should be going on right now too. With the waters up, one of our favorite pastimes over the years in May and early June has been watching the flow. I know this probably sounds odd, and we've even had it happen where we would be watching the river flood and the logs coming down the river, because this only happens one time a year, and other people might be seeing wolves. They're like, hey, there's wolves over there, and we're like, we can see those anytime. We're watching, look at the size of that log coming down the river. And one of the coolest places to do this, and you may have to wait till next year to do it, is in Lamar River Canyon. This is an amazing spot to watch a wild river flood in its full glory. There's a rock that we watch, and some of you may know it. It's a big boulder that sits in the middle of the river, and we use it as a water gauge. And when the water peaks out over top of that, or very close to it, we know that we're at about peak runoff. It's a huge rock, and in the winter it's pretty much high and dry. But in the spring, when that water's flowing, it is an amazing brown cataract that is a sensory experience like no other. The sound of that water rushing through the granite-studded channel of the canyon, the sight of the water flowing and bouncing in all directions, it's spectacular. The cold water, even on a hot day, the cold air that's flowing down through that canyon is memorable. It's really neat. So I'd encourage you in the future to keep that in mind and check that out. And as beautiful as it is, like a lot of Yellowstone, it's dangerous. So don't ever think that you can cross the rivers with impunity here, especially at this time of year, because if you listen close, you may hear the dull boom, 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 boom of cobbles, rocks, even boulders rolling down the drainages of these different rivers. It's flowing that high that you can hear the rocks moving underneath the water's surface. And that is definitely not a time you want to be fording rivers and streams. Do it much later after the water's gone down, and it's a risk even for the wild animals too. A friend of ours some years ago was watching a bull bison just intent on crossing the Lamar River, and the river was up and out of its banks. It was flowing high and heavy, but this bison wanted to cross the river, and he entered the river right upstream of what kayakers call a strainer. And this is a big log jam or an obstruction where the water can flow through, but big objects don't. And as a boater, you definitely don't want to get caught against one. You get pinned there, you get caught underwater, and it'll just hold you there. And it's not a pretty situation. So this bull bison entered the water, and if he had swam slowly, he would have passed on the near side of it. And if he swam faster, he would have cleared it and made it to the other side. Well, in this case, this 2,000-pound animal hit it dead on. And the way our friends described it was like watching a leaf disappear in the flow. Shoo, gone. This 2,000-pound, 1-ton animal disappeared like a leaf in the flow. And 2 days later, they saw a bison carcass, probably his, at the head of the Lamar Canyon. So it's not something to be messed with. As beautiful as spring is, it definitely has its edges too. I'm really stoked to see some of the birds here. We've got osprey that are back now and tending nests and building nests. There's one that a researcher friend asked me to check in on and report back as to whether it's being used right now. So young George and I are going to have to do that here pretty soon. Peregrine falcons, oh man, they've come back from central western Mexico, and they're on their nest. The nest is referred to as an eyrie, and there's no nest material. They basically scrape out a little spot in the dirt on a rock ledge on a cliff, and they lay the eggs right there and care for the chicks right there. And this time of year, it's crazy. These little tiny chicks, if they've hatched out yet, will be a little bit bigger than a ping pong ball, and they have these giant yellow-orange talons. And at that time, as they start feeding, then the conveyor belt of food really has to get going. And listening for the male to return with food is really a cool experience, because as he approaches, if he's got some food, and they hunt birds principally, maybe he's bringing in a swallow or a flicker or something like that, he'll hear him call to the female, "Pee, pee," and that's his signal to her to leave the nest and come get the food and take it back to the kids. And sometimes they'll transfer it in air, like she'll fly up and turn and they'll hand it off directly, and other times he'll drop it in midair and she'll catch it. Amazing, very cool. And then take it back and then of course parse it out and feed the chicks. So I'm stoked to see that when we get back in the park. Check out the blacktail ponds and Swan Lake for all the waterfowl. And there's still a few migrating birds, or a few birds that hang around during migration that we don't see often through the rest of the year, like things like avocets. But here pretty soon, Floating Island Lake, we're going to see the courtship dance of the ruddy duck. And if you're not familiar with ruddy ducks, they're just kind of a burgundy colored male with this bright blue bill. And to impress the girls, he taps his bill on the water as he kind of does this vocalization that sounds something like drives the girls wild. And again, all of these hallmarks of spring that are really teed up right now, they're going on, they're just making us feel like life does return to the Yellowstone after a long winter. So thanks for joining me. This has been a treat to talk with you again for this week's wild conversation. Definitely subscribe down below if you're watching on YouTube, and like us if you're on Facebook, and definitely share this with friends who you think are Yellowstone fans or are curious about what has happened in this place and what will be happening as time goes on. And don't forget to log on to yellowstonelife.com, download our free 5 things you can do right now to tune into animal language, to really prime yourself for what's happening in your yard. But also when you come to Yellowstone, you'll be much more clued into how to find things out there that everyone else is missing. So jump online, follow us again next week at the same time, same channel, 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time each Thursday. Thanks so much. I'm George Buman, and have a great week.